A chimpanzee sits beside the body of a lifelong companion. The companion has stopped moving. Hours pass. Then an entire day. The chimpanzee remains nearby, watching, touching, waiting, not searching for food, not responding normally to the group, just waiting. Most people assume animals have no real understanding of death. They see a dead body, they react, then they move on. The science says otherwise. Across the natural world, researchers have documented behaviors that seem strangely familiar. Elephants returning to the bones of relatives years after death. Dolphins supporting dead calves at the water's surface. Crows gathering silently around the body of another crow. Chimpanzees carefully grooming companions that have already died. The deeper question is not whether animals notice death. Of course they do. The mystery is whether they understand what death actually means. And surprisingly, modern science still doesn't have a clear answer. What researchers have discovered is both fascinating and unsettling. Because the closer we look at animal minds, the harder it becomes to draw a line between their understanding and our own. Death is one of the most important events any organism can encounter. From an evolutionary perspective, recognizing death has obvious advantages. A dead body may signal danger, disease, predators, environmental threats. An animal that ignores such information may not survive for long. But recognizing death is not the same thing as understanding it. Humans eventually develop what psychologists call mortality awareness. We understand that death is permanent. We understand that it happens to everyone. Most importantly, we understand that it will happen to us. This ability shapes nearly every aspect of human civilization: religion, culture, art, philosophy, even many of our daily decisions. But where does that awareness begin? And are humans truly alone in possessing it? For decades, scientists assumed the answer was yes. Then researchers began collecting observations that complicated the picture. One of the most famous examples comes from elephants. Field researchers noticed something unusual. When elephants encounter bones, they generally ignore the remains of other species. But elephant bones are different. Again and again, elephants have been observed approaching the skulls and tusks of dead elephants. They touch them gently with their trunks. They investigate them carefully. Sometimes entire groups gather around the remains. The behavior appears deliberate, almost ceremonial. Researchers still debate exactly what these encounters mean. But that's not the strange part. Some elephants revisit the same remains years later. Not food, not shelter, not territory, bones. What researchers found was difficult to explain through simple instinct alone, and then the mystery deepened. Among chimpanzees, scientists have documented reactions that seem remarkably emotional. In several observed cases, chimpanzee mothers carried the bodies of deceased infants for days or even weeks. At first glance, this seems like denial, as if the mother cannot accept what has happened. But interpreting animal behavior through human emotions is dangerous. Scientists call this anthropomorphism, the tendency to project human experiences onto animals. Even so, the behavior remains difficult to explain. The mothers often reduce normal activities. They remain unusually attentive to the body. They protect it from disturbances. And they sometimes continue these behaviors long after any practical purpose exists. The explanation should have ended there. It didn't. Researchers studying dolphins documented similarly puzzling behavior. Mother dolphins have repeatedly been observed pushing dead calves toward the surface, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The effort is exhausting. The calf cannot be revived. Yet the mothers continue. Why? No one knows for certain, but researchers suspect these behaviors may reveal something profound about social attachment. The stronger the social bond, the more difficult it may be for the brain to update its expectations when a companion suddenly disappears. In other words, part of the brain may continue behaving as though the individual is still alive. Humans experience something similar. Many grieving people report hearing the voice of a lost loved one. Others instinctively reach for a phone to call someone who has already died. The brain is a prediction machine. When a relationship has existed for years, the brain does not instantly rewrite its model of reality. Perhaps animal brains struggle with the same problem, but then scientists encountered crows. And the mystery became even stranger. When a crow dies, nearby crows often gather. Researchers once believed these gatherings were forms of mourning. Then experiments revealed something unexpected. Scientists placed taxidermied dead crows in areas frequented by wild crows. The reaction was immediate. Large numbers of crows gathered. They became alert, vocal, cautious. What researchers discovered was remarkable. The crows appeared to be gathering information. The dead crow acted like a warning signal. The birds studied the location. They observed potential threats. They learned from the event. In some cases, they remembered dangerous locations for years. What looked like a funeral may actually have been a sophisticated survival strategy. But that raises an even deeper question. Can understanding death emerge without understanding mortality? The distinction is important. An animal may recognize that another individual has permanently stopped functioning. That does not necessarily mean the animal understands that the same fate awaits itself. This is where the science becomes much harder to interpret. To understand your own mortality requires a surprisingly complex set of cognitive abilities. You must possess some sense of self. You must understand the future. You must imagine events that have not yet happened. And then you must imagine yourself no longer existing within that future. Even among humans, this realization develops gradually during childhood. Young children often treat death as temporary. Only later do they fully grasp its permanence and universality. So what evidence exists among animals? Very little, and that absence may itself be revealing. Despite decades of research, scientists have found almost no convincing evidence that animals anticipate their own deaths in the way humans do. They avoid danger, they flee predators, they protect injuries. But these behaviors can emerge through instinct and survival mechanisms without requiring conscious awareness of mortality. Yet some findings continue to challenge that conclusion. Great apes demonstrate self-recognition in mirrors. They plan for future events. They remember the distant past. They maintain complex social relationships. Many of the cognitive building blocks associated with mortality awareness already exist. The deeper question is whether those pieces ever combine into something resembling human understanding. No one knows. And that uncertainty may be one of the most important discoveries of all. For much of history, humans viewed themselves as fundamentally separate from other animals. Then science began removing those boundaries. Animals use tools. Animals solve problems. Animals communicate. Animals form friendships. Animals grieve. With each discovery, the gap became smaller. Death may represent another step in that process. Not because animals necessarily understand death exactly as humans do, but because their responses suggest that loss, absence, and social attachment may run far deeper in nature than we once imagined. The evolutionary implications are enormous. Social species survive through cooperation. They depend on relationships. They depend on trust. When a member disappears, the consequences affect the entire group. Natural selection may therefore favor brains capable of recognizing and responding to death in increasingly sophisticated ways. Perhaps what we call grief is not uniquely human. Perhaps it is part of a much older biological story, a story that began millions of years before our species ever appeared. And perhaps the most surprising lesson is this. The question was never really about death, it was about connection. Because whenever scientists observe animals reacting to the loss of a companion, they are witnessing evidence of something deeper, a relationship that mattered, a bond strong enough that its absence changes behavior. In a universe where survival often seems brutal and indifferent, that fact feels strangely beautiful. The body stops. the individual disappears. Yet for a time, something remains. A memory, an expectation, a connection that the brain is not ready to release. Whether animals understand death itself remains uncertain, but their behavior suggests they understand something remarkably close to what makes death matter: loss. And perhaps that understanding is more powerful than we realize. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more. See you in the next one.